Hey everyone. Welcome to Adobe Live. Are we live? We're live right now, yeah?
Sure are. Yeah.
Sure are.
Let's go.
We'll just edit that out later. No one will know. Welcome to Adobe Live. I am Andrew Marston, and we are with Alesis Heaps. We are at Yond Studio. Um, and I'd like to just start out with by painting a little picture. So imagine that you and your team are tasked with creating a package of promotional videos to promote an event. Now, this event it will include many famous people. It will be attended by thousands of attendees, and the only asset that you're given is a single stock image, and you're expected to deliver 18 promotional videos that tell a story and, more importantly, drive record numbers of registration to this event. And that is the situation that we found ourselves in a few months ago. And we're going to walk you through the process that we went through to deliver on that. And spoiler alert, we did drive record numbers of first day registration. We're going to walk through in this stream everything from concept to design, and then we're going to end getting our hands dirty in After Effects, walking through a few technical things there, so that hopefully by the end, you might feel a little bit better prepared if you find yourself in a similar situation. And we are watching the live chat. Hi, Jeff Burns, Jake in motion. Hey, Jake. Thank you for joining. Hi, Jen. So we're watching the chat on YouTube and on Behance. So while we introduce ourselves, I'd love to know where everybody is hailing from as you watch this stream. And I'm going to kick it over to Alesis, if you wouldn't
Yeah,
mind introducing yourself a little bit.
for sure. I'm Alesis Heaps. What's going on? I'm the creative director here at Yond. Andrew is our lead animator here at Yond, which is a fun little studio, kind of remote situation. He's in Arizona. I'm in Pittsburgh, and we have our EP probably lurking around here somewhere. What's up, Kyle? And he's from Denver. So we're just a fun little studio. We work together, and we have a fun segmented way of doing things that I find very fun because I really like to be able to work with a team. I'm so used to working solo that I just kind of got used to it, and being able to work with folks who can kind of have a nice relay approach is fantastic. So we're taking that same relay approach to what we're going to share with you today. I'm going to kick things off with talking about the concept through the design. We're going to hand it over to Andrew to get through those nuts and bolts, so like the really exciting stuff of layers and essential properties in After Effects. And I'm jumping in to share some my screen here so that you can kind of see where we started with this one. From the onset here, like Andrew said, we were given pretty much just one stock asset. They're like, hey, make it work, make a graphics package. What does this look like in motion? And that's an interesting challenge for a number of reasons. You know, you need to know if we can work with this asset whatsoever for animation. You're not just making a static frame that's going to live on signage somewhere. You're making separate frames that all look and smell alike and then move in beautiful motion and kind of solve those problems along the way. So this is what we were working with. We're going to come back to this. Remember this image and its beautiful glory, and we're going to kind of pop into what else we had at our disposal. Now, the design team at with our client ASAE, they had already started working on the branding for the event. We knew what it was called. In Unity We Thrive was their kind of message that they wanted to come through in this one. And they were working with that stock asset, just kind of playing around with what does it look like when it transitions from the kind of black and white to color to purple, playing with the brand colors. This was still a work in progress when we entered the fold. So from here, we were challenged with, can you make this exciting for people to watch? Can you highlight all of our wonderful guest speakers, our performing artists? And can you please, most importantly, we need people to come to this thing. So how are we driving and reinforcing the theme here that we've already spent so much time building and turning that into numbers and clicks and engagement, all that fun stuff that we worry about all the time. So you're probably wondering, let's get right to it. What did this look like when it came into fruition? I'm gonna let this play so you kind of see what we're driving towards today. came together in a pretty nice, flashy, basically title sequence graphics package with Andrew's lovely animation. We're highlighting our speakers. We've got some fun connect text going on, lots of texture, lots of color, and just lovely animation that is allowing these folks to be highlighted, and you're starting to get a little bit of momentum and excitement kind of building before we finally resolve to our end card. It's a little bit different from that image. Remember, you saw earlier, we're coming back to it. And this is nice to be able to see this one deliverable, but we need to highlight a bunch of different people. So we actually had several deliverables on this one. We had that one long 30 seconds that kind of got through everybody, but then we want to be able to break those out into individuals as they were announced, because as this event was going on, they were still kind of hashing out the details. They had their keynote speaker, they had Amanda Gorman, poet laureate, wonderful, but they weren't sure who else was going to be presenting on which days, who was going to be their performers on maybe Saturday of the event. So we needed to have a modular approach when we were going into this, knowing that there was a chance that somebody might kind of evolve and change and swap that out. Like, oh, Nellie's not performing for us, it's going to be Beyonce. That'd be so cool too. But we need to be able to respond to these as we're developing it. So we're keeping that in mind as we're going into our design. Now, as we're going through our kickoff, we're talking to the client, all this lovely stuff is coming to fruition. We had a bit of a kind of two-pronged approach that I'm going to touch on. One being externally, what are people taking away from this, and what do we need to focus on to solve our clients' problems and make sure that we're getting the point across. We know we need to focus on this idea of individuality and unity. That's the theme of the event. It's people coming together, celebrating their differences, and coming together in a stronger way so they can work together and create organizations, be just a stronger organization as a whole by attending this event. We have these textured elements that we need to work with from the pastiche of the faces as they come together. Let's see if we can leverage that even further to build off the brand rather than just leaving it at that. And we know the event is in Cleveland, and around the corner, there's just all this beautiful street art and murals that maybe we can tap into a little bit of the locale where this is being held and honor some of the art and the culture of the area, and tying all these things that we're kind of starting to build some ingredients to this soup. Now, if that's what we want it to look externally, remember I'm working with a team here. I need to remember that we have an internal approach that's going to set you up, Andrew, for success, because I am doing the concepting, I'm doing the designing, but you got to make this stuff move and make sense. So I'm keeping you in mind. I'm always thinking of you, pal. Don't worry. So here, I know we got to have some expressive motion. Any type of boards, I'm not just making a static frame after static frame and saying, all right, Andrew, figure it out, send you to the wolves. I would like any type of animation that I'm planning to be executable and also tie in the theme and the purpose of everything that we're trying to do here. We know we need to simplify a little bit. That image that I showed you with like all that pastiche of faces, it's beautiful and lovely. Lots going on to it. We don't want to overwhelm the senses with this design. We're trying to get engagement and excitement, but we're not trying to overwhelm and overburden. So maybe we can simplify a bit. And also, Illustrator, as the medium I work within, After Effects is the medium that you, Andrew, work within. They work really, really well together, but sometimes you just there's some things you gotta rebuild, and I don't want to put too much burden on you. You're already gonna have to work with all these frames, so let's just make it a little bit more simple for you where we can. And finally, that adaptability concept. We showed you how many deliverables we needed for this one. There's just a ton of moving parts, and we needed it to be modular so we can change out any type of speaker we need as we need to. And also, this is going to different platforms, so it's not just going to be 16:9. Sometimes, as you know, we need things in 9:16, and this is a very different type of format, and just trying to make that work not only in design but in animation. Again, I'm always thinking of how that can be nice and smooth. So these are our approaches. I've got our external factors. We've got our internal factors. How do we distill all of this? And we're at a blank page. We're ready to start solving this problem in design. What's step one? You just start throwing out shapes and textures and just seeing what sticks. Absolutely, that's totally fine for some. I just like to start even earlier with getting a little bit of inspiration and working up a mood board. because several reasons. It gets me inspired. I like seeing what type of fun work I can, and just starting to pull pieces. I'm like, oh, maybe a little bit of mint in this soup. We'll go with basil. That makes more sense. Maybe a little basil in this soup is going to be nice. And maybe it's just a bit of a taste of this kind of extra salt is what we need. This is where I'm building my ingredients that are going to go into my stew. It gets me excited, starts planning out what I'm making here, but also I need something for my client to react to. Clients, for the most part, not all of them, just some of them, don't really speak the language of design and animation super duper well. That's a subconscious thing for them, we're not as articulate like us who are maybe steeped in this all the time, know exactly the difference between drop shadows and blending modes and all these fun things. That those aren't words that they know how to use. So I need to put out images and figure out the through line for how we can communicate with each other so that these ideas and their ideas combine to solve what they're trying to do, so that when we are going into design, we're not just guessing. We kind of have a direction and some guide rails to get us there. For example, in the bottom right, as I was playing with these papercraft elements that I think I wanted to incorporate into the design of this piece we were working on, the client gravitated really strongly as we were presenting these in person or over Zoom, as is a new tradition. They liked that rocket one. It's like, yes, I love that. There's depth to it. There's shadows. I feel like it's like a diorama. You can kind of reach into it. It has a humanish softness to it that we really like. But one on the far right, the brain, like origami, pointy, sharp. I don't like that. It's too hard. So I'm hearing things that they're not using very specific design language, but they are using terms that help me to understand what they're looking for. They reacted to something that was a bit more accessible, humanizing was their word, and something that was more sterile, more cold was not ideal. They're trying to get away from that kind of corporate feel. Perfect. And that means that I'm saving a bit of time. When I start designing, I get to avoid some of that revision process that can be so tedious. I'm not designing different styles and putting that towards them, being like, which one do you like, A or B? I know a style, I know a direction. I get to spend a bit more time refining the idea rather than exploring concepts, which is, I just saves us time, gets us closer to a quality that we're looking for. Now, I said we were coming back to this. That's very true still. This was our asset that we started with. I had reached out, we actually got to our producers like, hey, can you get this asset for us? We're going to need this so that we can maybe start breaking it apart, working it into our design frames, and figuring out what we have to work with. Like, how is this built? I would like to isolate those faces so that when we animate them, like a cool, maybe tessellating pattern, then we have the access to pull it out, ideally in a vector asset. So we reached out, we got it back. Let me switch over for just a second to our Illustrator file. And as you're looking at this, immediately, I think when I zoomed in on it, I was like, this doesn't quite look right. It looks a little different than how I remember. And once I clicked in, I realized why. And I'm sure that you've all used probably the live trace option within Illustrator, which is wonderful for some things. In this case, it did the thing, it vectorized it, but for animation, this isn't ideal. This stock image is working for them in their purposes. They got to use it for static images. They got to use it for their signage. They were not manipulating it too much. They're just adding some text, maybe adding a gradient over top of it. For us, we need to make these faces move in a dynamic way. And with all these pathways, I'm going to spend a million dog years trying to make this work. So our solution is maybe we can simplify this, remembering back to that is something that we're trying to do with one of our internal factors, is how can we achieve what they're asking us to do in the timeline we have, still make it beautiful and make it make sense and do what they needed to do, which is get people signing up for this thing. So from here, I just decided we're going to recreate this. I think that makes way more sense. And you'll see once we get into frames how we accomplish that. All right, that's all our backstory. What did we make? These are our frames. And you can kind of see all of this stuff at work. So from the general design, just at a glance, you're seeing that we're working with a limited color palette. It's the brand colors, but just drawn back a little bit so we're not, again, overwhelming. We're just tantalizing a little bit. We're building off of that texture with some extra paper elements. And oh, I didn't switch. That makes sense, doesn't it? There we go. Now you're seeing what I'm looking at. Reiterating, limited color palette. we are building off of those textures with some extra paper textures. Some of this is, some fun grid work that we built with a grid tool with an Illustrator. We're just overlaying different types of texture elements to add a bit more visual interest to this. We don't want to keep repeating the same element too much because it can be a little redundant. Let's just expand outward a little bit. We're adding some extra of these design elements that kind of harken to a bit more of that individuality, that uniqueness, that just extra little sparkle and twinkle that an individual embodies. So, and there's something else for Andrew, you to kind of make moves so you're not just working with the same face over and over again. It gets old. I'm thinking of you again all the time. And from there, you can kind of see the final face is quite the same face as the stock we used. We got an approximation, right? This would have been very hard to recreate faithfully. We had to simplify just a touch. One, because we had limited time. Two, because I think it works better in our purposes. Our design was a bit more simple. We were working with a limited color palette. This version is only the brand colors. The version they were using was a huge gamut of colors, and this was kind of getting us a little closer to like reinforcing this is ASAE. This is you right here. This is everybody within your organization, and it's also just a little bit more simplified because when this is going out there, this is playing pre-event. It's never going to be playing in the event itself. So all their signage that is going out in all over the event space, it's not competing with us. You're never going to see this right next to each other. So we can kind of get away with this not being one-to-one faithful recreation of our stock asset. So from this is fun and very kind of overstimulating to look at. If you're not familiar with a style board, it's kind of like a comic strip. You read it top to or left to right, top down. Let's take you through what this concept emotion is. So when Kyle, EP, and I were kind of jamming on this creatively, we wanted to talk about and really make sure we're highlighting and honing in on this idea of an individual and the impact it can make in a group. So we've obviously that face, that's the hero image, right? That face that comes together. Let's break it down and let it represent individuals within the community, within organizations. And we use it as a design element throughout this, the motion that it goes through in a lot of places. As I take you through this, you're going to notice a lot of like this cascading wave-like effect. We love this idea of when you drop like a pebble into a pond and it ripples out and it starts small but becomes bigger. It makes a bigger impact as it goes outward. So a wave ended up being a really good repeated element that we kept coming back to. And you see it really clearly visually in like that first frame, that second frame, you see that radiating out from the individual in the first or the second kind of graphic comes back behind the face here, but also in motion as you move forward through the piece. So like this next scene where the faces are all moving one direction and the frame next to it, they start to turn the other way, and it's kind of cascading. One informs the other, and we thought this was like this really interesting thread to keep pulling, where it's so representative of what we're trying to do and what the organization really stands for, where one person makes such a big impact, and coming together and moving together is what we're eventually leading to resolve to our in this piece, the final frame. In general, we are trying to come together and bring organizations to the same place. So it's that sort of abstract thinking that you can kind of feel way more than you can see, but it's solving their problem in a very quick way. Because like these frames, they're scenes that could be on for maybe 2 seconds. So you need to be mindful that it reads, but it doesn't necessarily need to be like, as you're seeing it, you understand it, it's a feeling you're imparting. So as you can see from the start to the end of this, we're moving from a sense of the individual is divided and separated out from its peers. So there's one face, front and center, in the start of this. As you move through, next frame, there's more of them, they're together, but they're visually divided, literally by blocks in this case. They have some uniqueness to them. We're still celebrating that level of an individual, but they're all looking different directions. They have different colors to them. As you move to the next scene, all right, we're getting closer to unity. We're all in the same place now, but we're not quite doing the same thing, right? That top line, that is very different from the other lines beneath it. They're looking one way, and everybody looks the other way in this cascading motion, moving through to our next scene. We're getting literally closer. Our faces are touching now. We're becoming more of a unit, but we're still looking different directions. We're still not moving in the same direction. And in the scene, it kind of changes, right? Just a touch where one stands out from the pack. He turns orange. He looks at the camera, and then he quickly turns the other direction, and everybody follows him. But that spark of change sparks change in others. It kind of ripples out in this kind of interesting, one person can make such a big influence on others. They're a leader in the pack, but they're taking the pack in a new direction. And that was a fantastic transition for us to take us into the world of who exactly are we highlighting in this event. We're trying to get excitement for these big names, these big draws. The leaders of the pack are our keynote speakers like Amanda, or our really exciting performers like Nelly. This is a really nice transition into their spotlight to shine. Just a nice little drop zone, like simple stuff, keeping it black and white since everything is a little crazy going on into this nice little spot for the title to come in. I'm not collapsing. Well, if we get time to jump into Illustrator, you'll see that I don't collapse my text because I want Andrew to have as much information as possible, so that if he needs to change this out, it's not Amanda Gorman, it's someone else famous. I don't know famous people off the top of my head, unfortunately. I have to spend too much time behind the screen. Then he can do that really easily. And finally, as we're moving out of our highlight spotlight, we are kind of having our faces move. Oh, we're cascading. That's that wave again, small thing becoming big, but we're all looking in the same direction now. We're moving together. We are different colors and different in our individuality, but we're moving in the same direction, the same kind of very smooth flow to finally tessellate into our final form, that lock up, that hero image that takes you to the theme. In unity we thrive. And you kind of feel all of this motion and all of this content kind of just brings it all together to what we're actually here for. And this would, in theory, in the animation, you'll see a transition to register now. And hopefully we did our job right. People get excited. And I like to think that we did, because we did drive record registration with this fun new promotional video. And yeah, that was a lot. I don't know. Was that a lot, Andrew?
I could have listened to that for a long time. That is also why you're a creative director and I am a technical executioner in After Effects. Great job, by the way. There was a lot of chat, and almost all of it was, I don't think we got any questions. So if you're watching and you want to ask a question, feel free to drop that in either the Behance chat or the YouTube chat. But also, just great job. One person said, such nice behind the scenes already. Thanks and cheers from Cologne, Germany.
Germany. Aw. Thanks for joining us.
And if anybody did just jump in and you're wondering, what are we doing? We were tasked, Alesis and I are from Yond Studio. She is the creative director. I am the lead animator. And several months ago, we were tasked to make a package of promotional videos to promote an event. And we were given basically a single stock image, and Alesis just walked through the creative process of how she used that to kind of create a narrative. I'm summarizing what you just said.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Yeah, created.
We took the concept of moving, the theme of the event being in unity we thrive. So we're moving from an individual to a whole group, and why they're stronger together to build this graphics package that they can use to promote this event, get people excited and signing up.
Yep.
But this isn't anything without you, man. Show us how you took all this abstract creative director speak and turned it into something actually tantalizing for people to watch.
Yeah, thank you. The project file, I've been really trying to go over what to highlight from this, because there are thousands of layers and we could talk about animation, but I really feel like the most valuable part of this project is how conceptually you made it modular, and even not just the structure is modular, but there are modular assets within it, like that head that turns. That is a reusable asset that I'm going to go over. so on my screen, yes, I am screen sharing. Hey, hey. We have a breakdown of all the shots that we were expected to deliver. And we need all 6 of these shots in 1, 2, 3, yeah, all 6 of these shots in 16 by 9, in 9 by 16, and then 9 by 16 with special safe zones for specific media platforms, social media platforms. So that's a total of 18 deliverables. And anybody who's worked on a graphics package like this before knows that one of the biggest liabilities here is once you've built out this whole animation and you have all 18 of your comps in After Effects, the biggest liability is that the client will have a note that then causes you to have to go into each one of those 18 comps to make the same small tweak to the animation, which is pretty inefficient. So the first part that I'm going to talk about is how we set this project up to be modular so that if the client had a note about the animation, we can make it once and it would ripple across to all 18 comps without impacting the variability of the different spotlighted speakers or artists that we were highlighting. So I'm going to jump into, this is it. This is the main comp with everything. Now, this intro, it only plays in the beginning, but then we jump into this section here where we have the speakers. Now, the way we set this up is with Essential Properties, and shout out to, I believe it's Chris Robinson on the After Effects team. I'm sure the whole team, but I believe Chris was one of the masterminds behind Essential Properties, which in my opinion is one of the best feature additions in recent years to After Effects. Super powerful. If you don't know about Essential Properties, Essential Graphics, highly recommend you go to Jake Bartlett's Jake in Motion. I saw you in the chat, where he has several good videos about Essential Properties. Quick plug for my friend Jake.
You have a fan in the chat telling you that your markers look great, and the organization is really key in this. And if you know Andrew, he's like, gosh, you can set your clock to this guy. He's fantastic with keeping things organized, and that helps us a lot.
Thank you. So the way we set this up was with a simple drop down. So this comp right here, it says SO4 Amanda. If we go into the source, it is the same source that we see on the layer above it and the layer 2 above that. That's because they are all holding the same set of speakers. And if we click on this drop down, we can choose Amanda Gorman, we can choose Nelly, recording artist Nelly. And all we have to do is click that drop down to a different selection to quickly change the order that these appear in. And we don't impact any of the animation that's happening around this. Now, I will click into this just to show you briefly like how many layers we're dealing with here. I don't want to dig into all those, so I set up a handy dandy little example animation that shows the exact same concept. So here we have this quick promotional video, shows Alesis' face, and then the Yond Studio end card. But if we didn't want to show Alesis, we could show, wait a second, is it, oh, you know what? It's not working because I undid all the expressions so that I could show you how to set this project up.
Yeah,
theoretically,
from the start.
Theoretically, we could select that drop down. In that comp, here is the comp that has my headshot. It has our executive producer Kyle's headshot. It has Elise's headshot. Now, if we want to be able to select between those, it's a pretty simple setup. And how are we doing on time? Great. So in this null, or I use voids, in this void control layer, I have a drop-down menu, which, let me just rearrange some screens. I just renamed it to photo selector, and I, in the edit menu, created 3 different options: Alesis, Kyle, Andrew. And then on each of these headshot layers, we can reveal the opacity. To really tutorialize this, we can hit T to reveal the opacity. Kyle Hamrick has a great shirt with that. And all you have to do is pick whip from your opacity property to your drop-down menu. And then in the expression, what we're going to do is we're going to declare a variable. We'll call it picker. and it's the drop down. I'm going to say dot value, so that I can't remember if you don't put the dot value, if you actually get the value that we're looking for. So I put dot value just to be safe. Then we can have a simple if statement. If picker equals, and we're going to want, this is Alesis, so we want number 1. If it equals 1, curly bracket, then this opacity will be 100. And if not, so else, open curly bracket, we want it to be 0. And then we can just copy this expression, right click on the opacity property, so select copy expression only, and then we can select the other 2 headshot layers and just hit Control or Command V, and that pastes the expression into the property from which it was copied. And now we just need to go into that expression and change that value. Instead of if picker equals 1, for Kyle, we want picker to equal 2. And for me, we're at the very bottom of my screen here. For me, the picker would equal 3. And the reason why we're doing 1, 2, 3 is the value of the dropdown is the number in the list that it is. So Alesis on this dropdown is Alesis is 1, Kyle is 2, Andrew is 3. So now, because we are turning on and off opacity essentially using the value of this dropdown, when we change the dropdown, then we get the person who we've selected. And from here, we can go into our essential graphics. I'll delete, I already had put it in there from when I was practicing this. From the essential graphics, so let me just resize that a little bit. That size is fine. We select that drop-down menu property, drag it into essential graphics. Now it appears. And when we go up 1 layer, I hit tab to reveal the flow chart, which shows how the hierarchy of the pre-comps and how they're nested in each other. I'll go 1 layer up where this pre-comp lives. Now we have in our essential properties our photo selector drop-down menu. And unlike last time, when I changed the value from myself to Alesis to Kyle, all that, it shows the correct person. And when we play it back, the animation is preserved. Let me enable the end card. The animation is preserved for any of the people that we have selected. So that, in a nutshell, is essentially what we did in these comps that have all the layers. Each speaker had its own, the opacity of all the related assets to each speaker were tied to a single dropdown. And then that meant that when we went into our main comp, if we needed to change the order, or in our shorter deliverable versions, like the 15-second spots, we could just select from a different item on that dropdown. And yeah. Alesis, nice. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's super fun for me to like see so much of you behind the scenes, because like in certain projects we get to work together really closely, where we might be in the same project working together as we have been recently. But on this one, it was very much that relay. Like I was like, here, make something, and you're like, okay, I got you. And I don't know, man, this is wizardry to me. The expressions, I've got a loose training on that one, but you have that nailed pretty fascinatingly. There's going to be some things that I'm going to take away from it for sure. Before, if you don't mind, we had a question earlier that I do want to see if you've got a fun answer to. We got Maximilian asking earlier that he liked the frames and the concept. He is very interested in seeing how you transitioned from 2 to 3. And I just kind of wanted to touch on maybe how our workflow sort of works when we're talking about transitions, and how we decide where one person's creative will ends and another person's begins. I try to be not super prescriptive in design. I might lay out some general ideas and explain them to Andrew when we're doing a creative kickoff meeting, or when we're like, all right, we're gonna animate, let's do this. But I want him to have enough space to make more sense of something than I might. He's very intimate with the tools, obviously, you can see that. So I want him to have a little room to play. So tell me, what was your thought process when you were moving from frame 2, which is our fun little quilt type of image, to 3, which was our composition notebook?
Is this, wait, this is frame 2, yeah?
Yes, that's us. That's frame 2.
This, it's funny you mentioned this specific transition because this is the one I feel like um, there was a little bit like it was one of those situations where we had elements on the screen in one frame, and then we had elements on the screen in another frame. And I guess just my philosophy and approach to transitions in general for animation is to find common elements and see how we can make them guide the transition so that it makes there's some red thread. If anybody's taken advanced motion methods with school motion, which I used to be a TA of, red thread was a concept that came up a lot, and just something that would tie one shot to another. So in this case, shot 3 has a lot of the heads, and shot 2 also had the heads, and the heads so far have been, they're like they are the red thread. We start with this solitary head here, and then it splashes down to get this whole layout. And so my goal here was to get to be able to follow the heads but create the grid, and we kind of had to have a grid already appearing on screen. It's just not, you know, as rulered as the following grid. And so as quick as possible, because there is a match cut in here which you can kind of see, we just pop from one frame to the next, as quick as possible to align that grid of heads from this sort of missized, misaligned layout to this grid, which is all perfectly ruled. So yeah, the short answer for transitions is have common elements guide. It could be just where different things sit on the stage, or it could be a match cut where you know there's a big motion coming, so that's just going to quickly lead from one to the next. We do kind of hide any like that background pops off right at the fastest point in motion, which is kind of the crux of any match cut as we scale down. Did that answer your question?
I mean, answered my version of the question, but I think that you got the gist across. Roland pointed out like a match cut works really well here. Yeah, it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but you are also doing a little bit of extra finessing to hide it even more with having those elements pop from one to the other. The motion is informing that transition a little bit.
And that actually leads into the next section that I was hoping to touch on. The next key element of the modular approach that we took to this project was not just from a structural standpoint, how can we swap in and out content without impacting the animation so that we could quickly implement animation changes. The next part was that we have a lot of repetitive elements, namely this head rig. So I was going to dive a little bit deep into how this head rig is set up. So this grid here is all, if we click layer name, we can reveal the source name. It is all head rig v01. And let me see, I created a duplicate of this comp so I wouldn't mess it up. And it is right here. So here is that head rig. Now there's a lot going on in terms of, we have, just like I explained before, how to set up that drop down to be able to essentially just turn on and off layers. We did the same thing here because we wanted to be able to use the same rig but make it look different. So we have a texture selector so we can quickly change the texture to be different. And then we have different controls that we can animate the texture. We could change the frame rate that the animation happens, the scale, the position of the texture. So the texture is it's easily customizable through essential properties. But that's not really what I want to talk about here. I wanted to talk about how do we link the path animation. That's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover how do we link path animation to a single slider, because you can't use the value graph, which is the best graph editor. Speed graph is the worst. It's just definitively
Agreed.
It's been decided. You can't use the value graph when animating path animation between keyframes. It doesn't interpolate. So here's my method. Here on this, let me reduce this down. On this control head layer, we have this single slider, which controls that animation. And on each of these, we have two head layers, and they toggle on and off depending on which direction he's looking. And we have two ear layers, which do the same thing. And the ears were just because I need a little bit of parallax. And all we did here to create this animation was, if I disable the expressions, I just animated half of a head turn. So here, if I scrub the timeline, we just have half of a head turn, and then in the expressions later, I was able to flip it. But what I want to demonstrate is, to keep it simple and for the sake of time, how do you link a path animation to a slider? So here we have this simple demonstration with a path that animates from this plus to a circle. And then on this control void, we have a slider control. Now there are 4 main ways to do this. And let's see here, it's 42. We'll see how many we can get through. The first one I'll mention, 3 of them use add-ons or scripts, extensions, or plugins. So the first one is joysticks and sliders. You have to make sure that your 2 paths are 1 frame apart. And then on joysticks and sliders, you can click on this button. We'll name our controller layer controller. And then you have an effect on that newly created null that you can now animate, and even it'll kind of overshoot to the negative in this case. So that's how you do it with joysticks and sliders. I'm going to delete that and disable that. Oh, right. Joyce, the other reason why I don't use this method myself is because because it removes the keyframes. And like we just saw, you can easily then, if you undo it, if you don't actually keep using the joysticks extension, then you don't have your animation anymore. The next is with Duick Angela, and I believe Duick Basil, the old version, has something comparable. Under the links and constraints tab, you can click the gear icon next to connector. Then you have to select what slider, what control property you want to be controlling this interpolation. And you say pick control. And then you select your path property and say properties, and that adds the expression. So now the expression is there. It's a long expression. There's a lot going on there. But on your control null, now you have a connector slider, a new pseudo effect. We're going to set the minimum value to 0 and the maximum to 100, so that then our original slider, we can just drag from 0 to 100. That is the second way.
Nice.
I hope this isn't too technical, but this is my life.
I think it's a lot of people's lives. No, we love this.
The third way is with Motion 4, or I believe there are other versions, older versions of Motion that do the same thing. You can click the animated properties that you want to control with a single slider. And then there is a feature called Animo. And if you click that, we'll just run that script. Boom. And now there is a new, it shied and locked the original layer with the animation, and it created a null, an Animo null. And now we have a slider to control that path animation. But I don't do any of these. But those are the probably the most user-friendly. I use a let me see if I need to move my screen sharing to the bottom, and I can just, I don't need to use K. I have an expression on my K bar to add this quickly, but I can just do it real fast. So on this path property, I'll create a variable called a slider. I'll pick whip to my slider property, semicolon. Now we're going to basically remap time with this time slider. So we're going to declare a first variable called T0 for time 0, and we'll say it is T1 dot time. So it is the time of our first key. T1 will be our second variable. It'll be key In this case, I'm just going to say key 2. I usually would say like num keys so that we just go to, we take the last key. But here we know we have just 2, that time. And then we will say another variable s equals linear slider from 0 to 100. So as our slider goes from value 0 to value 100, please go from T0 to T1. Then we're going to say value at time S. And that was quick. I just know we're running out of time. Feel free to screenshot this or ask me more questions via email or DM, and I can explain it more fully. But we're basically remapping the value of the interpolation at specific times to the range of 0 to 100 on this slider. And I like this method because I know exactly what's going on. I have more control. I'm not worried that some script created some bloated code. And because I have it on my K-bar and I use it all the time, it is the fastest one for me. All right. And with that
was delightful, truly. I want to circle back for 2 seconds and point out that our comments about our feelings on the speed graph versus the value graph inspired some very hot debate in the chat. And I just have to say that we might have to have an actual debate, what the host debate, to figure this out once and for all, which one is better. But I feel like all of this is a ton of effort. And I feel like there's a reason you're doing it. There's probably a reason, as Kyle points out, like you're setting up a lot of time here to rig all this. It better be worth it. So what's your reasoning for taking this approach versus just saying like, all right, I got to animate this star once or twice and I'm going to duplicate that out and maybe change it every time?
Yep. Let me just share my screen one more time real quick.
Do it.
And thank you for bringing me full circle. I got real lost down that path.
We all get lost in the sauce.
Basically, we use this head rig so many times. It is the backbone of this whole project that if we were to keyframe this path animation every single time, as you said, it would take 1,000,000 dog years, maybe even 1,000,000 human years. And by rigging, let me look into the essential properties of one of these. By rigging the path animation to a slider, we can feed that slider value up into the essential properties. And that means that wherever we have the pre-comp of this head rig, we have access to that slider value. And in that instance of that head rig, we can change the look direction of a single head. And let me see if I can. Nope, that one's not visible. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm getting confused.
I mean, there's a lot of layers. I don't blame you whatsoever. Essentially,
every single head, we don't want to animate individually. We want to have that animation preset and linked to a slider so that we can, we don't have to redo it later. And that is how, in this way, we've made this project modular, both with the assets that we are animating and from a structural standpoint with that drop down to select which speaker that we were trying to highlight.
Perfect. Yeah, that all makes sense. This isn't your only rig in here, right? If I'm not mistaken, you have another head rig that looks about and not just left to right. Am I correct? I remember that.
You're correct. Yes. If we have 3 or 4 more hours, I'd love to dig into that.
So in this one, what's some key takeaways you felt really kind of pulled it all together for what we were trying to do, which was try to keep it modular, try to keep it simple, try to solve our clients' problems, make it beautiful along the way.
Yeah. And from a technical standpoint, it was making sure that we only really had one animation that had to be edited, and the way that the project was set up, when we changed that animation, that change would ripple to all 18 deliverable comps.
Perfect. And I imagine keeping that all organized, as our friend Jake in the chat is pointing out, notice all of your layers are labeled. Yes, that's a good practice. You got to keep that organized. It's going to help you out, even if you're the only person touching on that project.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So that is all I had prepared for this. Like, I have several other things I could talk about, but I feel like we're starting to run towards the end. Are there any questions in the chat? Feel free to let us let us know.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see if anyone had anything
Oh,
fun to
I
say.
had a question for you, Alesis. So
Oh, shoot.
that process, the process that you outlined, is that pretty much the same process that you follow every time you get a new brief? Like basically, because I know this project, you walked through specifically how you approached it, but like, is there a general format for how you walk through creating a concept and all the way to design, just like in general blanket?
I wouldn't say that it's literally the exact same step by step that I take for every project. For the most part, yeah, I suffer hard from just staring at an empty screen and being like, what make, you know? So being able to just have some sort of exercise, usually that's in like sometimes I'll literally do pen to paper and mind map a concept, like just starting with, if, for example, with this one, I might write unity and then branch out from there and like individuality coming together and figuring out what that looks like just gets me in the headspace to kind of start thinking conceptually and tying that back into what we're trying to do. But yeah, for the most part, you got to start somewhere. You need to start doing some sort of mood boarding, just reference collecting before you start designing it, if you want to really have an easier time of this, because it does set you up to be able to solve those problems earlier so that all of our time on the back end, I think I mentioned it earlier, we're trying to get to a point of there's a barrier, right? We on the front end are trying to eliminate any client feedback that might make your life harder so that when we're getting to the revision phase, we're making more of a qualitative design choices. Like we might want to take that time to make things better and improve how it looks, how it feels, and anything else that's going to make this a little bit better rather than just needling into things we could have solved earlier if we had just thought a little bit. There's a fun question here. How long did it take you to set all of this up in AE? Can you give me a ballpark of what this project looked like? It's a question from Roland. He's very curious about this.
Yeah. Basically it took about 2 days to do like file prep, the main rigs, and in order to create an animatic without being too locked into something that could change. And then I think it was like 4 or 5 days total for after that for animation and implementing client notes and like, oh hey, we need to add this speaker and we need to swap this thing out. Yeah, so I think total 2 days for setup and 4 to 5 for animation.
Is that incorporating the other versions where we had to go vertical and also like those like breakout pieces?
Yeah. I guess if let me share my screen real quick.
Do it.
This is, I promise this is not a technical rabbit hole, but here is my approach to when we know it's going to be a 16 by 9, 9 by 16, 3 by 4, 4 by 5, all that. I just try to hang on the screen share. I don't think you can see it, but like the screen share toolbar was like right over where I wanted to click. I tried to animate in the maximum size that would fit every single version. I think this is a pretty common practice, but if anybody's not doing this, you know you're going to be 9 by 16, 16 by 9, and you can get away with like if the design is going to be the same, then just make it 1920 by 1920, and then it'll fit both both formats. And we did stuff like this as much as possible. Or when you're rigging with expressions, instead of putting in actual specific dimensions, if you can make it relative to the comp size, then when you resize that comp, hopefully things rearrange correctly.
Yeah, no, this was all I learned a lot from you, and I work with you on a daily basis. I really appreciate you breaking this down. So if we're gonna wrap this whole thing up, we really spent a lot of time talking about how we could solve our client's problem. They came to us, they had just a stock asset. They said, can we turn this into a graphics event package that gets people excited to register, that highlights all of their talented, very talented keynote speakers and performers? Can we do it in a beautiful way that ties the whole brand together? And can we do it on a timeline that makes sense for us? And I think we did. We hit some good metrics for them. They seemed happy. I think the project turned out really well. I've loved working with Andrew, of course. And if you have any questions, if you're curious about any of this further, Andrew and I are pretty open books. If you want to reach out to us, you can check out Yond.studio. That's our studio website. You can hit us up on Instagram at Yond_studio. We kind of look forward to just hearing from all of you.
No,
Later, y'all.
thanks for watching.
Of course.